Hey guys, welcome back to the writing room. Last time we had to talk about how to begin drafting up basic characters and character design. We talked about goal making. We talked about how to add little traits and characteristics to your character to make them stand out more. And today we're going to keep talking about character creation and design, but today we're going to talk about something a little different. One of the biggest questions that I get asked a lot is how do you make a good, relatable character? I appreciate this question, but it's not nearly as hard as you think to write a character to be relatable. So instead of making this whole video about writing a relatable character, we're going to talk more about the pros and cons of relatability and characterization, and also some alternatives to relatable characters. And yes, there are cons to relatable characters, but we'll get to that. Again, this isn't really scripted. This is just me kind of taking notes and kind of answering off the cuff. And again, this isn't really a class, so please take what I say with a grain of salt. I hope you learned something from this, but these are just my tips for writing. So welcome to Raven's Writing Room. Let's get started. So first, what is a relatable character? It's simple. It's a character we identify with, a character whose motivations, actions, and ideals reflect our own, or at least are ones we're familiar enough with to attach ourselves to. Many anime and comics are great at doing this. Naruto, for example, feels bullied as a kid. He wants respect and thus acts like a prankster and a jokester to get attention, even though it's negative. Lots of anime fans are people like that who feel excluded from normal society and are endeared to Naruto for the way he is and the way he acts. He's sympathetic. We get his dilemma and we feel for him. Even though his actions may not be our own, his situation is something we recognize.
It's almost unbearable, isn't it? The feeling of being all alone. I know that feeling. I've been there, in that dark and lonely place.
Certain characters may act in a way that we understand because we ourselves could place ourselves in the character's shoes. That's relatability. In fact, many villains today in most media are becoming more and more relatable. Villains are no longer these evil, mustache-twirling villains who do evil for evil's sake. Now they're all relatable with understandable motivations and goals. The recent Joker movie, for example, turned the Joker, who for a long time was just a psychotic killer clown with no backstory or motivation outside of pure chaos, into a very sympathetic and relatable story about a man driven to the breaking point.
I never heard him cry. He's always been such a happy little boy.
And it makes sense, right? As I said in the last video, characters are people, and as people, they will have understandable and relatable goals, traits, and attributes. Creating a relatable character is simply giving them goals, traits, and attributes that we recognize and sympathize with, or ones that at least the audience will. For instance, if I want to tell the story of a detective and his team of cops chasing after a notorious crime lord and his underlings who killed his wife, the detective gets a lead on the criminal's hideout and prepares to send his men in to find him. The criminals open fire in response and the police hunker down waiting for orders. The detective sees one of his officers get shot and he immediately pulls his men back to avoid further harm and weeps over the loss of his officer because he goes, now first I lost my wife, now I lost an officer. How many more people is this criminal monster going to take? He'll swear to get revenge for him and he'll never let these criminals get away with it. It's stereotypical, but it's relatable. There's relatability in there. We understand the moral code the detective is following. We respect it. We've seen it. We often feel it in ourselves. We hold life sacred, and thus, when the officer is killed, we recognize the recklessness of rushing in and understand the detective's decision. We relate to the motivation. It's vengeance, plain and simple. The detective loved his wife and lost her to a crime lord. We understand it. This is relatability. Even if you've never lost someone you love, you can at least understand how it might feel to lose them. The best way to write a relatable character is to recognize how a natural system of responses would take place for a normal person. If you write a character who lost his wife, or you write a character who just won the lottery, what is the natural response a human might make? What's the response you might make? What's the response anyone might make? What would they do? Writing relatable characters relies on a natural sense of cause and effect and a natural sense of a moral code that we can all understand and respect. Okay, now what if I were to tell you that's not the only way to write a good character? Let's change that last setup I talked about. Let's change it up with a few more details. Okay, the detective that we talked about is a dirty cop back in the day, and he did dealings with this gangbanger. Now, as time went on, the gangbanger rose up to being a crime lord, and the cop rose up to being a detective. The former gangbanger wants a bigger cut between the two. He wants more money for what he's doing, and the detective refuses. So in return, the dude kills his wife and steals from his house to send a message. Now the detective is angry that he got backstabbed after just getting backstabbed, so he's out for some payback. When the gunfight breaks out and the officer is hit, the detective completely ignores him. There's only one thing on this detective's mind, right? Revenge. Plain and simple. This bastard broke into his house, killed his wife, stole his property. You don't get away with that and walk away. He was your snitch. He was your fink, and the fink does not get to turn the knife on his handler. So the detective storms the place. Lots of cops die in the hailfire, but he gets his hand on the gangbanger anyway, then shoots him in the foot before dragging him back to the cop car. And then he claims that he only got shot in the foot because of, he was resisting arrest. All right, so what changed? This isn't quite as relatable, is it? The cop isn't a morally righteous or upstanding person, a topic we'll get into in a later video about protagonists versus antagonists, but he's not after this dude out of love. It's out of pride and personal satisfaction. Hell, the very idea of who's good and bad here is a little skewed. In fact, neither seem very good, are they? Sure, the gangbanger's a criminal, but he got cheated and just wants things equal. The detective may be on the side of justice, but he's a dirty cop and isn't really after this guy because, oh, you killed my wife, how could you? It's because you don't get to backstab me. You don't bite the hand that feeds you. They're not really relatable. But what are they? Well, they're engaging. Didn't you feel a bit drawn into that? Imagine this is a TV show or a movie. It's a bit more interesting. What's going to happen when the dirty cop catches the dude? What's the gangbanger going to do when he's caught? What if he testifies and reveals that the detective's a dirty cop? Will people believe it? Do people know that he's a dirty cop? Like, there are more questions now. How will the cops feel about this reckless raid? And here's why that's the case. Let me explain why this felt so engaging. Good characters can be relatable, but great characters are engaging and dimensional. In one of ER's videos on the Death Note Netflix remake, he does a great job discussing this, where he points to Aaron Eaz's notes on great character writing.
In fact, I think flawed and relatable in general has bad priorities. And my reasoning why coincides pretty well with Tips for Great Character Writing by Aaron Eaz, best known as the head writer for Avatar: The Last Airbender. He says characters should be dimensional, fascinating, compelling, and believable, more so than they should be likable, relatable, and/or sympathetic. Eaz notes that these last three aren't adversative to great character writing, but when misused, as they often are, they can definitely ruin it.
Now, I don't agree entirely with Aaron Eaz's points on great character writing. There are a few discrepancies there that I would love to hash out with him and discuss. But there are lots of things that he gets right, especially when he says that a character should be dimensional, fascinating, and engaging. Those 3 points are very, very crucial for great character writing. How is that different, though? Well, it doesn't have to be. A great character can be relatable and still have those qualities, but relatability, I would say, is secondary to those qualities. You can have a relatable character, but you can also have a relatable character who is engaging and dimensional. They don't have to be unmarried from each other. Like, let's take a good example. Here's one of the best examples I can think of. Saitama from One Punch Man. Saitama is a man who always wanted to be a hero. So after becoming fed up with dead-end jobs, hunts, and not having any direction, he trains himself to become a hero and trains himself so hard that he loses all his hair. But in the end, he becomes so strong that he can defeat any monster or villain with just one punch. Now this alone is not that engaging until you realize that he hates this.
またワンパンで終わっちまった。クソったれ！
By becoming so strong nothing can beat him or challenge him, he's lost something that makes him human. Life has become dull for him, uninteresting, a bore. He is only a hero because it's a hobby, not for some altruistic reason like nobility or the greater good. He seeks challenge or a reason for what he does. You'd think this would be a boring character, but he's not. His interactions with the world are what make him engaging. How does a man who has infinite power deal with a world that will never reach his stand? How does one who can't lose deal with life that doesn't challenge him? This is a fascinating character and one we can ask lots of questions about. But he's also engaging, as we want to see how Saitama will address this problem. How will he continue being a hero when the job is starting to bore him? How will he react to a disciple wanting to learn under him, or a ninja declaring himself his rival? What will he do when he finally meets his match, if that ever happens? If he's not in it for morally just reasons, like for the greater good or for fighting evil, what is he in it for? And if his morals are different than other people's, is there a moment where he may not really err on the side of good? Could Saitama potentially become the villain? These questions make him a fascinating and engaging character. But the best part is, we can also relate with Saitama on some degree. Though we can't relate to his power, Saitama still deals with everyday problems and issues like we do. The very reason he started training to be a hero was because he was done with his dead-end boring life where he kept getting dead-end jobs, not being able to hold down anything. We can relate to that on some extreme, where we have to deal with a boring or mundane existence. But he also, even after he gains his powers, he still deals with things like us. He worries about renting, he worries about making rent for his apartment and lives in cheap living conditions due to this. He works with the Hero Association just to make money and is required to catch a certain number of criminals to keep his license. Much like how many of us have deadlines and expectations in our day-to-day lives. We understand some of the positions and struggles he faces, and yet he's removed enough from us to be engaging and interesting. Saitama, in my opinion, is a wonderfully written character, and one that I have nothing but admiration for in terms of characterization.
不純物そんなもん関係ねえよ推理って言ったっけこれからも一つアドバイスしてやる楽しむのが目的ならそれ以上強くならない方がいいぜ
Okay, so now we've talked about why engagement and fascination in character creation is so important. So now the big question is, how do we do it? How do you create an engaging and fascinating character? We talked about how to create a relatable one. How do you create an engaging one? The problem is there's no exact answer to that. An engaging or fascinating character can have many sources and reasons for being that way. But there are a few hints and tips you can try. For one thing, throw out this word, sympathetic. I can't tell you how many RPs or stories I've witnessed or been a part of where someone makes their character a sob story junkie. Their character has such a tragic backstory that they have a hard time coping and won't you please just feel sorry for them. Their tough life has made them fragile, so that excuses any weakness they have. But it also makes them stronger because their difficulty made them tough, so they're tough to handle. So like you may have a character who's a werewolf and was bitten as a baby, and the werewolf killed their mother and father or someone that they really cared about, so they're broken up about it. They have night terrors, they cry in the night, they need someone to, love them and sympathize with them and feel bad for them. Don't you just feel so awful for them? But they're also a werewolf, so whenever the bad guy shows up, they can kick so much butt. It's sympathetic. It's a word that can do so much harm to a character, in my opinion. Here's the thing. That's not good character. Making me feel sorry for your character or making them as likable as possible doesn't endear me towards them. In fact, it can really turn me off to them. I'm not saying to avoid tragic backstories. Tragic backstories can be good. What I'm saying is, and I'll do this more in another video on backstories possibly, but here's the thing. Backstories should be the basis for motivation, not character. And there is a difference. Batman, for example, lost his parents as a child, but he doesn't cry about it nightly. He used that incident to give him a motivation to make a difference. Spider-Man lost his Uncle Ben and used that tragedy to establish his motivation as a hero. But Harry Potter lost his parents as a baby and uses that throughout the last half of his series to whine about it. He whines about being the chosen one, whines about his scar, whines about the expectations people have for him. I was always annoyed by this. Anytime he brought up, oh, my parents are dead. Like when Ron says, your parents wouldn't want this for you. Yeah, well, I haven't got those, have I?
Bloody hell, Harry. The woman's torturing you. If the parents knew about this...
Yeah, well, I haven't got any of those, have I, Ron?
God, just be a prima donna. As my brother used to say, if I'm going to be the chosen one, I'm going to own it, okay? If someone came up, if I suddenly got sucked into a fantasy world and they told me, you are the hero that will save us, I'm owning that, okay? I'm not going to go, I didn't ask for this. I'm going, all right, give me the sword, give me the shield, let's go do it. I'm the chosen one. Let's rock this, Wouldn't that be a more interesting character than a character who just went, I didn't want this, I never asked for it, oh, feel bad for me. Backstories can be a useful tool for establishing motivation, but not for establishing character itself. Okay, next, after you throw out sympathy and likableness. And again, you don't have to throw them out permanently. You can use them sparingly, but don't build your character on these. Next, let's bring in the word conviction. We already talked about characters and goals, and a character with a goal is great, but a character with a fierce conviction to achieve that goal is even better. I talked about how, you need a character with a goal, but it's important to have a character who's actively trying to achieve it. A character should be constantly focused on that goal, and a good example is the Straw Hat crew from One Piece, particularly Luffy. Every episode of One Piece ends with the same line. Luffy saying, "I'm going to be king of the pirates." It is a constant reminder to the audience, no matter what happened in the episode, this is his ultimate goal. He has conviction. He will not give up on it. When people laugh at him for his goal, he just ignores them and moves on with his day. He's still going to do it. He tells everyone, "I'm going to be king of the pirates. This is what I'm going to do." But it's more than just Luffy. All of the crew have individual goals, motives, and ideals. They're all fundamentally different characters, and all are deeply fascinating. But why? Because all have a conviction so strong as to follow each other, though they have clashing interests and outlooks. Like I said, Luffy dreams of becoming king of the pirates and will travel the world to make that dream a reality. None of his crew want to be king of the pirates too. In fact, a lot of them, even though they see Luffy as potentially reaching it and are willing to help him reach it, that is not their own personal goal. They don't share that same dream. But they all go with him anyway, because by standing by him, their own dreams can be accomplished, and he will be there to help them accomplish their dreams. The dynamic of different convicted and motivated characters make them all stand out and look endearing. We know them by voices, lines, and their interests and their goals. They are all so unique, not only in appearance, but in so many other facets. That's what makes them so endearing, engaging, and fascinating to us. How do these characters interact so well, even though they aren't all in it together? Think of that in comparison to someone like the Power Rangers. The Power Rangers may all be individuals, but they're all doing the same thing. They all want to fight the main villain of the season or villain of the series and win and protect people. Okay, fine, that's okay, but I think what's more engaging is seeing a crew of total differences, like total unique interactions, which I think makes the character stand out a lot more. Now, let's compare that to something else. How about those new Star Wars movies? What are Finn's convictions and goals? Outside of fighting the First Order. Like, you could argue that's everyone's goal in the Resistance. What's his personal goal? What does he want? What about Rose? What's hers? How about Poe? What's his? What does he want? Like, say the war ends. What's his new goal? What does he want next? Okay, let's go to the next one. How about Rey? The only goal we can even really attribute to Rey is that she wants to learn the truth about her parents, and even that was kind of a non-issue. It doesn't change anything about her. Sure, we can say that all of their goals is the same, to stop the First Order and all that, but they don't have any personal stake in it, other than maybe Finn getting back at Phasma. Maybe. But I don't know what their personal stake is. I mean, sure, maybe Rose's personal stake is vengeance for her sister, but that's barely brought up. Finn's, I guess, again, Phasma. Poe, never really established. There's little personal about it. A lot of it is just doing the right thing, and I should make a whole video about just that, why this motivation is nonsense. But I'll give you the answer why with this simple response. Remember this and write it down if you can. Right is arbitrary. Right is not tangible. Remember how I said a goal needs to be a tangible, achievable goal? Doing the right thing for the sake of the right thing is not tangible. It is vague. What one person sees as right, another person may see as wrong. Sure, in Star Wars Revenge of the Sith, we all love to mock the line,
"From my point of view, the Jedi are evil."
It's stupid. It's a juvenile response. It shows juvenile writing. But at the same time, it's a fair argument to make in this case. If one person says, "I don't think what you're doing is right," well, from my perspective, what I am doing is right. That's the problem. Right isn't objective, and it can't be called a goal. Again, remember how I said that some villains are becoming more relatable and understandable? Some of them have very understandable, relatable goals. So what happens when the hero shows up and says, "What you're doing is wrong"? The villain's obvious response is, "No, what I'm doing is right. What you're doing is wrong." And then it just becomes a case of I said, she said. No, I'm right, you're wrong. It just becomes a pissing match. Avoid this issue like the plague, because if your character has a conviction to a specific goal, something that even after all the war is done that they can achieve, then you've got something good. You've got something better. You've got a better character. Doing right is fine. There's nothing wrong with wanting to do good. There's nothing wrong with a character who, like Spider-Man, for example, he's fighting because he wants to do moral righteousness. He wants to be a hero because he wants to take responsibility for his powers. And he's a fine character, but there's so much more to Spider-Man than just his superhero work, and that's what's engaging. His relationship to Mary Jane Watson, his trying to hold down a job, his trying to keep the secret that he's Spider-Man, him trying to... there are lots of facets to Spider-Man outside of just doing the right thing. And sometimes his outside life conflicts interfere with his hero conflicts, and he has to weigh the options. There is depth to Spider-Man outside of just, I'm here to do the right thing for the right thing's sake. That is weak. Avoid that. In the end, though, I can't tell you exactly the recipe for good engaging characters, because if there was one set recipe, eventually those engaging characters would seem pretty bland, wouldn't they? Okay, but I think that's a good area to stop for now. I hope what you learned from this video is this. So, to rehash, good character creation requires giving a character a goal. It also requires you adding more detail to the character than what's basically portrayed with the story. Make them people, make them individuals, make them stand out. And then, secondly, relatability can be fine for a character. It's good to make a character understandable to the audience because we're going to understand what they're doing. But more important than relatability is making a character engaging and fascinating. Make them someone we want to follow. Make them someone that we want to see how they end up. Because relatability can become boring and bland because there's nothing interesting about them. There's nothing to keep us tied to them. Remember that a sympathetic and likable character isn't in and of itself bad until you go too far with it and make that their whole character. Instead, make a character who has solid convictions, something that they seek to achieve or something that they're really after or trying to overcome, and you will make a character that we want to follow. All right, I think that does it for now. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Please leave a like and a comment down below if you have any other questions and concerns. I'll see you in my next video. Take care, guys.